but I want to make sure that everybody's kind of clear about, all of the take-home messages for the blood pressure lab. Because I know, like, at least last semester when I started looking at some of the write-ups, particularly like on the one with the noxious stimulus, the cold pressure test, um, people, I think maybe because, I'm being confusing here. Most of the time when we're doing these labs, we're saying, let's get lots and lots and lots of subjects, and we don't really care what the individual is doing. What we really care, like on average, what's happening. Like this is more what we tend to look at to see what is more interesting. And the individual cases aren't as interesting to us. Except it does give us information, like how like spread out around the average the actual individual subjects are, does actually tell us something about how much do we trust the average trend, right? I kind of mentioned if the average was here and all of the other things that created that were kind of close, I'd say, oh, that average is a pretty good representative of all of my data. But if I have like my averages here and actually all the data that created that average is actually really spread out from like 0 to 100, and yeah, sure, this is the average, but how much does that average really tell me about anything I care about? So I think in the experiment with the cold pressure test, looking at the reaction to pain, one of the things I mentioned last time, but I just want to reiterate, is I want you to kind of notice that the spread around, like you could get an average, sure, you can, but does it really mean anything? Is it interesting? And I would say the average in that case isn't really that interesting. What's more interesting is just seeing how spread out the reactions are, those indexes of response from quite extreme to not much at all. So like when you're writing up your blood pressure lab, when you're doing about the cold pressure test, I would focus more on the range of the data. However, on the other one, the one before that, the exercise one, the Harvard step test, there the average actually is useful. We saw that in general, most people had a large increase in systolic and not in diastolic. And there, looking at the average and not thinking about individuals is actually more useful to see what's interesting. But I was realizing that theoretically there's kind of two very different things going on part one and part two in terms of kind of thinking about how to interpret the data. So is this making sense? Is this clear what I'm talking about here? I want to make sure people kind of pay attention to that wide range of responses in the pain part.